In a small village where traditions run deep and appearances matter most, a beautiful bride sits alone in her room, tears falling silently down her cheeks. Her wedding dress, carefully altered to accommodate her wheelchair, lies abandoned on the bed. Outside, the chapel bells ring as her able-bodied cousin walks down the aisle in her place, wearing a different dress but carrying the same bouquet. The bride's own mother had orchestrated this cruel switch, claiming it would preserve the family's dignity, but they hadn't counted on the village priest, a man whose moral compass would shake their community to its core. As the ceremony begins, he notices something amiss. The wrong bride stands before him. What happens next will challenge everything this village believes about love, worth, and human dignity. Would this priest's bold stand change not just one wedding day, but the heart of an entire community? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather-bound photo album sat heavy in Sarah Chen's lap as she traced her fingers over its worn edges. Inside, a younger version of herself smiled back, a girl of 16 standing tall beside her mother at a piano recital, her emerald green dress matching the jade pendant her grandmother had given her. That was 3 months before the accident. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the weight of the piano keys beneath her fingers, the way the music had flowed through her like a river of light. Now at 32, she had found different ways to create beauty. Her kindergarten classroom at St. Mary's Elementary was a testament to that. Walls adorned with finger paintings and creative projects, each one a reflection of the little souls she nurtured every day. The sound of her mother's footsteps in the hallway drew her attention. Eleanor Chen had always moved with purpose, her heels clicking against hardwood floors like a metronome keeping time. Even now, 16 years after the accident that had changed everything, those footsteps still carried the same rhythm of barely contained anxiety. "Sarah?" Eleanor's voice drifted through the door. "The dress fitting is in an hour. We shouldn't be late." "Coming, Mom," Sarah called back, carefully placing the album on her bedside table. She wheeled herself to the mirror, adjusting the collar of her blouse. The jade pendant still hung around her neck, a constant reminder of both what was lost and what remained. The accident had taken her ability to walk, but it had given her something else, a perspective that changed how she saw the world and how she taught her students. Every day, she showed them that different didn't mean less, that challenges could become opportunities, and that kindness was the greatest strength of all. Her classroom was where she had first met James. He'd come to pick up his nephew Tommy, a bright-eyed 5-year-old with a stutter. While other parents and guardians sometimes avoided eye contact or spoke to her teaching assistant instead of her, James had walked straight up to her desk that day, extended his hand, and smiled warmly. "You must be Miss Chen," he'd said. "Tommy talks about you constantly. Actually, he sang your praises all through dinner last night when he wasn't practicing the breathing exercises you taught him. They're really helping." That moment had struck her like a chord of music, clear, resonant, and true. James saw her, really saw her, not as someone to be pitied or avoided, but as a person who had touched his nephew's life in a meaningful way. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her expression softening at the sight of her daughter. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." She stepped into the room, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from Sarah's blouse. "I just want everything to be perfect for your wedding." Sarah caught her mother's hand, squeezing it gently. "Mom, perfect doesn't mean what you think it means. James and we've talked about this. The wedding will be exactly what it should be, a celebration of our love, wheelchair and all." Eleanor's smile wavered slightly, but she nodded. "Of course, dear. You're right, as always." She busied herself with gathering Sarah's purse and jacket, her movements betraying the tension she tried to hide. Sarah watched her mother, noting the new worry lines around her eyes, the way she kept checking her phone, as if waiting for an important message. Something felt off. but she pushed the concern aside. Wedding planning was stressful for any mother of the bride, she told herself. The slight tremor in Eleanor's hands as she helped Sarah with her jacket was probably just excitement, not anxiety. The drive to the bridal shop was filled with Eleanor's carefully cheerful chatter about flower arrangements and reception details. Sarah half listened, her mind drifting to the moment James had proposed. They'd been at the community arts centre where they both volunteered, teaching an adaptive art class. James had orchestrated a beautiful ruse, having their students create a collective art piece that, when assembled, spelled out, "Will you marry me?" in a rainbow of colours and textures. Your cousin Marina offered to help with the final dress fitting, Eleanor mentioned, her voice deliberately casual. She has experience with these things, working in fashion and all. Sarah turned from the window, studying her mother's profile. That's unexpected. Marina hasn't been involved in any of the planning so far. In fact, her cousin had been notably absent, sending only a brief congratulatory text when the engagement was announced. Well, family is family, Eleanor replied, her knuckles whitening slightly on the steering wheel, and everyone wants to be part of such a happy occasion. As they pulled into the bridal shop's parking lot, Sarah spotted Marina's sleek car already waiting. Her cousin stood beside it, elegant as always in a designer outfit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. Marina waved, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Sarah felt a subtle shift in the air, like the moment before a storm, when the pressure changes and the wind holds its breath. She thought of the photo album on her bedside table, of the girl she used to be and the woman she had become. Whatever changes life had brought, she knew who she was. A teacher, a fiancée, a woman worthy of love and respect. But as her mother helped her into her wheelchair, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this dress fitting was more than just another wedding preparation. Something in her mother's avoiding gaze, in Marina's too bright smile, whispered of decisions made in secret, of plans laid without her knowledge. She straightened her shoulders, touched her grandmother's jade pendant for courage, and wheeled herself forward. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same grace and strength that had carried her through every other challenge life had presented. The hand-painted ceramic bowl sat on Sarah's windowsill, catching the morning light in its swirls of blue and gold. She'd painted it on her first real date with James at the Community Art Centre's pottery studio. Her hands had been shaking that day, not from nervousness about her disability, but from the electricity that seemed to spark between them whenever their eyes met. James had chosen the seat next to her, setting up his wheel with comfortable familiarity. "I warn you," he'd said with a conspiratorial wink, "I'm terrible at this. My nephew Tommy's prehistoric-looking pinch pots are masterpieces compared to what I'm about to create." That simple admission of imperfection, delivered with such unaffected charm, had made Sarah's heart flutter. Here was a man who didn't feel the need to prove anything, who could laugh at himself and make others feel at ease in the process. "Well," she'd replied, "I guess we'll be terrible together then." The words had slipped out before she could catch them, and they'd both blushed at the double meaning. Their first attempts had been predictably disastrous. James's bowl had collapsed 3 times, while Sarah's had developed a decidedly questionable lean. But instead of frustration, they'd found laughter. By the end of the class, they were both speckled with clay, their failed creations set aside in favor of simple hand-painted pieces. "You know," James had said as they painted their bowls, "Tommy told me something interesting the other day. He has said, 'Uncle James, Miss Chen teaches us that beautiful things don't have to be perfect.' I think he's right." Sarah remembered how her brush had paused mid-stroke. Did he really say that? Word for word. "You've made quite an impression on him, on all your students, really." James had looked at her then, his eyes soft with admiration. "And on me." That bowl now held their engagement ring when Sarah wasn't wearing it, a simple sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, as unique as their love story. James had chosen it, because it reminded him of the blue swirls she'd painted that day, he'd said. Watching him with her students had been like witnessing a masterclass in genuine human connection. He never talked down to them, never showed discomfort when a child asked about Sarah's wheelchair or Tommy's stutter. Instead, he'd turn these moments into opportunities for understanding. Once, during a class art project, little Maria had become frustrated when she couldn't draw a straight line like the other children. James, who was helping that day, had knelt beside her desk. "You know what's interesting about lines, Maria?" he'd said, pulling out his phone to show her photos of famous paintings. "The most beautiful ones aren't always straight. Look at Van Gogh's Starry Night. There's not a straight line in it, but it's one of the most famous paintings in the world." Sarah had fallen in love with him in moments like these, when his natural kindness shone through without effort or pretense. Their romance had blossomed in small gestures, the way he'd automatically position himself on her left side because he'd noticed she preferred to wheel with her right hand, how he'd scout ahead for accessible routes without making a fuss. The natural way he'd included her in activities with Tommy and their friends. Their proposal story had become legend among her students. James had coordinated with each child to create a piece of art that would form part of a larger mosaic. For weeks, the kids had kept the secret, bursting with excitement. When Sarah had wheeled into the art room that Friday afternoon, she'd found her entire class holding their pieces up one by one, forming the question, "Will you marry me?" James had appeared from behind the last student, holding not just a ring, but their original painted bowl from their first date. Inside it, nestled on a bed of blue tissue paper, lay the sapphire ring. "I'm not perfect," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I thank God for that every day, because it led me to understand that perfect isn't what makes things beautiful. You taught me that, Sarah. You and your amazing heart. Will you marry me?" She'd said yes through tears of joy, and their students had erupted in cheers and hugs. Even Tommy, usually shy about speaking in front of groups, had shouted, "She said." Yes, without a single stutter. The wedding plans had come together naturally after that. They'd chosen St. Michael's Church, not just because Father Thomas had known Sarah's family for years, but because it had recently installed proper accessibility features. James had insisted on it, saying their wedding should reflect who they were as a couple, thoughtful, inclusive, and real. His family had embraced her completely. James's sister Margaret, Tommy's mother, had become one of her closest friends. "You know what Tommy said the other day?" Margaret had told her over coffee. "He said he wants to be a teacher like you. You've shown him that nothing can stop you if you have the heart for it." These moments, these connections, had built the foundation of their relationship. Every challenge they'd faced, from skeptical looks from strangers to the occasional thoughtless comment, had only strengthened their bond. James never tried to fight her battles for her, but stood beside her, a steady presence that reminded her of her own strength. Sarah touched the bowl gently, tracing the patterns she'd painted that first day. Tomorrow, she would marry this man, who saw her soul before he saw her wheelchair, who loved her not in spite of her differences, but with them, as part of the whole person she was. Their wedding would be perfect, not because everything would go exactly as planned, but because it would be real, honest, and true to who they were. If only she could shake this growing unease, this shadow that seemed to lurk at the edges of her. Happiness, her mother's strange behavior, Marina's sudden involvement. Sarah pushed the thoughts away. Tomorrow was her day, their day. Nothing could change that. Eleanor Chen sat at her dining room table, staring at 2 stacks of wedding invitations. The first set, Sarah's choice, featured an elegant wheelchair symbol embossed in silver beneath the traditional wedding bells. The second set, the ones Eleanor had ordered in secret, bore no such emblem, just classic pristine calligraphy announcing the union of 2 families. Her hands trembled as she slipped the modified invitations into envelopes addressed to the extended family in China. "It's for the best," she whispered to herself, a mantra she'd repeated with increasing frequency over the past weeks. They wouldn't understand. The sound of the front door opening made her hastily sweep the original invitations into a drawer. Marina's designer heels clicked across the hardwood floor, an echo of Eleanor's own purposeful stride. "Auntie," Marina said, kissing Eleanor's cheek, "everything is arranged at the dress shop. They're expecting us tomorrow." She paused, noticing the envelopes. "Are those the alternate invitations?" Eleanor nodded, unable to meet her niece's eyes. "For the relatives overseas, and some of the more traditional members of the community." She touched the thick, cream-colored paper. "Sarah doesn't need to know." Marina sat down, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table. "Auntie, are you sure about all this? Sarah's not stupid. She'll figure it out eventually." "Bye. And then it will be too late," Eleanor said, her voice hardening with resolve. "I've already heard the whispers at the market, at church." Poor Eleanor, her only daughter, and now this wedding. She pressed her lips together. I won't have her become a spectacle. The irony that her actions might create an even bigger spectacle didn't escape Marina. She thought of Sarah, her cousin who'd taught herself to paint with watercolors after the accident, who'd earned her teaching degree while learning to navigate the world from a wheelchair. Sarah, who never complained, never blamed anyone for her circumstances. "She's happy, Auntie," Marina said softly. "James loves her exactly as she is." "Love isn't always enough," Eleanor snapped, then immediately softened her tone. "You're young, Marina. You don't understand how cruel people can be. I'm protecting her." Marina thought of her own mother, Eleanor's sister, and how she'd reacted to the wedding news. "A wheelchair wedding, what will people think?" The words had dripped with the same concern that now etched lines around Eleanor's eyes. The front door opened again, and Sarah's voice carried from the entryway. "Mum! Marina! I brought lunch from that new cafe near the school." Eleanor quickly shuffled the remaining invitations into her desk drawer. Marina watched her aunt's transformation, how her worried frown smoothed into a bright smile, how her shoulders straightened as if preparing to carry a heavy burden. Sarah wheeled into the dining room, a bag of takeout containers balanced in her lap, her face lit up at seeing them both. "Perfect timing. I got those dumplings you love, Marina." As they ate, Eleanor kept steering the conversation toward wedding details that seemed increasingly important to her. The exact shade of the flower arrangements, the precise timing of the ceremony, the specific photographs that would be taken. "And you're sure about the wheelchair ramp being so visible?" Eleanor asked, trying to sound casual. "We could arrange something more discreet around the side of the church." Sarah set down her chopsticks. "Mom, we've been over this. I'm not going to hide who I am on my wedding day. James and I want everything to be open and honest." The word honest made Eleanor flinch slightly. Marina studied her dumpling with sudden intensity. "Of course, dear," Eleanor said quickly. "I just want everything to be perfect for you. You know how people talk." "Let them talk," Sarah replied firmly. "Anyone who has a problem with my wheelchair doesn't need to attend." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken words. Marina watched her aunt's face tighten, saw the calculations running behind her eyes. The modified invitations in the drawer seemed to pulse with guilty energy. Later that afternoon, as Sarah showed Marina her classroom photos on her phone, Eleanor slipped away to make a series of hushed phone calls. Each one seemed to add another layer of tension to her shoulders. "The dress shop called," Eleanor announced when she returned. "They need to do some additional alterations. Marina, you'll help tomorrow, won't you?" Marina nodded, though something in her aunt's tone made her uneasy. "Of course, Auntie." That evening, after Sarah had gone home, Marina found Eleanor sitting alone in the dark, holding one of each invitation in her hands. "We're doing the right thing," Eleanor said, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "Are we?" Marina asked quietly. Eleanor didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "Do you remember when Sarah was little How she used to dance around the living room, practicing for her recitals, how everyone said she was the most graceful child they'd ever seen. She traced the wheelchair symbol on the original invitation. Sometimes I wake up and for a moment, I forget. I expect to hear her running down the stairs. Marina understood then that this wasn't just about appearances or social standing. Her aunt was still grieving the future she'd imagined for her daughter, still fighting against a reality she'd never fully accepted. But as she drove home that night, Marina couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face when she talked about James, the quiet confidence she'd developed over the years. The wedding invitations sat like a weight in her conscience. Two versions of truth, two paths diverging. She wondered which one they were really protecting, Sarah or themselves. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the bridal suite, catching on the delicate beading of a pair of ivory satin shoes. They sat perfectly arranged on a silk cushion, shoes that would never touch the ground, chosen with the same care as every other detail of Sarah's wedding day. She'd selected them not for walking, but for the photographs, for the tradition, for the simple joy of having something beautiful to complete her bridal outfit. Sarah watched her reflection in the antique mirror as her mother fastened the last pearl button on her wedding dress. The alterations had been perfect, allowing the fabric to drape elegantly around her wheelchair without catching in the wheels. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she stepped back. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with something that wasn't quite joy. "I just need to check on a few details downstairs. Marina will help you with your makeup." Marina entered as Eleanor left, carrying a professional makeup kit. Her usual confident stride seemed hesitant. "Sarah, she started, then stopped, busying herself with arranging brushes and palettes. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, noting the unusual tension in her cousin's movements. "Of course," Marina replied too quickly. "It's just wedding day jitters. Everyone has them." She began applying foundation with practiced strokes, but her hands weren't quite steady. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Hair was styled, makeup applied, last-minute adjustments made, but something felt off. Too many whispered conversations in the hallway, too many meaningful glances between Marina and the bridesmaids. Then Eleanor returned, holding a garment bag that Sarah didn't recognize. "Marina, could you help me with something in the other room?" The words seemed rehearsed, careful. "Mom?" Sarah's voice carried a note of question, of growing unease. "Just a moment, dear. Wedding emergency. Nothing to worry about." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes as she and Marina slipped out. Sarah wheeled herself to the window, watching guests arrive at the church below. Her heart lifted as she saw James's car pull up. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, pausing to help his elderly grandmother from the car with gentle care. The door opened behind her. Sarah turned, expecting to see Marina, but instead found her mother and two of her aunts. Eleanor's face was set in a mask of determination that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "Sarah, darling," Eleanor began, her voice carefully controlled, "we need to talk about the ceremony." "What about it?" Sarah asked, though something in her already knew, had perhaps known since those secret phone calls and whispered conversations began. "The family has been discussing alternatives, ways to make the ceremony more traditional." Eleanor's words came faster now, like she was ripping off a bandage. "Marina has agreed to stand in for you during the ceremony, just for appearances, you understand. You'll still be legally married, but this way—" "What?" The word came out as a whisper, then louder. "What are you saying?" "It's for the best. Dear, think of the photographs, the videos. What will people say? Marina looks so much like you did before the accident, and she's already practiced walking down the aisle. The dress fits her perfectly now." Sarah's mind spun. The extra alterations, the hushed phone calls, Marina's guilty eyes. It all made horrible sense now. "Does James know about this plan?" Sarah's voice was surprisingly steady. The silence was answer enough. "You can't do this," Sarah said, her hands gripping her wheelchair's arms. "This is my wedding, my day. James loves me, wheelchair and all." "Of course he does, dear," one of her aunts said soothingly. "But think of the family, the community, your wheelchair. It would be all anyone could talk about. Get out!" Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "All of you, get out right now." "Sarah, be reasonable," Eleanor started. "Reasonable?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Like secretly planning to replace your daughter at her own wedding. That kind of reasonable." But they didn't leave. Instead, more relatives entered the room, creating a wall of concerned faces and misguided good intentions. Sarah watched in horrified disbelief as Marina was rushed in, wearing an identical wedding dress, already half into it. "It's just for an hour," Eleanor pleaded. "Just for the ceremony. You can rejoin everyone at the reception. No one outside the family need ever know." Sarah's eyes fell on her bridal shoes, still sitting pristinely on their silk cushion. She'd chosen them so carefully, another symbol of her refusal to hide who she was. Now they seemed to mock her, like everything else about this day that was. Being stolen from her. "The ceremony starts in 20 minutes, someone said. "We need to hurry." Sarah found herself being wheeled into an adjacent room, despite her protests. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like thunder in her ears. Through the thin walls, she could hear the bustling preparations continue. Marina being coached on her walk, the exact tilt of her head, how to hold the bouquet. Alone, in the small room, Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears. She could hear the church bells beginning to ring, calling everyone to gather. Somewhere below, James would be waiting at the altar, expecting to see her coming down the aisle. Instead, he would see Marina, a perfect walking bride, while Sarah sat hidden away like a secret to be ashamed of. Her grandmother's jade pendant felt heavy against her throat. She touched it, remembering all it symbolized: strength, perseverance, dignity, the same qualities that had carried her through rehabilitation, through building a new life, through falling in love. The sound of organ music drifted up from the church. The ceremony was about to begin. Sarah wheeled herself to the window, watching as the last guests hurried inside. Her bridal shoes sat abandoned on their cushion in the other room, never to be worn, like the truth of who she was had been, deemed too uncomfortable for public viewing. Father Thomas stood in the church office, his weathered hands resting on the leather-bound registry that had recorded the parish's history for over 60 years. He'd been adding wedding dates to these pages for nearly 3 decades, each entry representing not just a ceremony, but a story he knew intimately. His finger traced down to today's entry: James Mitchell and Sarah Chen. He'd written it himself last week, his careful penmanship matching the style of priests before him. In the margin, he'd made a small note about the wheelchair accessibility arrangements, a detail that would have seemed unremarkable to most, but to him represented something profound about how the church had evolved under his guidance. The registry held other such notes. 20 years ago, first integrated marriage ceremony. 15 years ago, first same-sex blessing ceremony, private. 10 years ago, installation of hearing loop system for deaf congregation members. Each entry marked not just an event, but a quiet victory for inclusion. Thomas closed the registry, remembering his conversation with Sarah and James during their marriage preparation sessions. They'd sat in his office, Sarah in her wheelchair, James pulling his chair closer to hers without even thinking about it, and shared their story. The way they looked at each other had reminded him of why he'd become a priest in the first place, to witness and bless genuine love in all its forms. "Father," Sarah had said during one session, "some people think our wedding will be different because of the wheelchair." "Different isn't wrong," he'd replied, sharing wisdom earned through years of challenging traditional expectations. "Christ didn't ask people to hide who they were. He asked us to love one another as we are." A knock at the office door interrupted his reminiscence. It was Mrs. Parker, the church secretary, looking unusually troubled. "Father, I've just noticed something odd. There seem to be two different versions of the wedding program circulating." Thomas frowned, accepting the papers she handed him. One version showed a photo of Sarah and James, a wheelchair visible and natural in the image. The other used a cropped portrait that hid any sign of disability. "Where did you find these?" "One set was delivered by the family this morning. The other was what we printed last week, approved by the couple." Mrs. Parker hesitated. "And Father, I overheard something in the parking lot. The bride's mother was having an intense discussion with someone about arrangements." Thomas's expression grew grave. In 30 years of ministry, he'd developed an instinct for when something wasn't right. He'd seen families try to maintain appearances at the expense of truth, had witnessed the damage such deceptions could cause. He remembered another wedding years ago when a family had tried to pressure their daughter into hiding her hearing aids for the ceremony. He'd put a stop to that, gentle but firm. "God sees us as we are," he'd told them. "Why should we present ourselves as anything else?" The clock on the wall showed 40 minutes until the ceremony. Thomas stood, his decision made. "Mrs. Parker, please find Mr. Mitchell and ask him to meet me in my office immediately. I need to speak with him before the ceremony begins." As she left, Thomas opened the registry again, looking at Sarah's name written in his careful script. He'd baptized her as an infant, watched her grow up in the parish, supported her family after the accident. He'd seen her transform from a bitter teenager struggling with her new reality into a confident young woman who had found her calling as a teacher. When she'd first returned to church after the accident, some parishioners had been uncomfortable with the wheelchair, the way it changed their familiar ceremonies. Thomas had used it as an opportunity to teach about Christ's radical inclusion. "If we cannot welcome all of God's children exactly as they are," he'd said in his sermon that Sunday, "then we have failed to understand the fundamental message of our faith." His phone buzzed, a text from his assistant about the final music arrangements. But something else caught his eye. A message from one of his younger parishioners who helped with the church's social media. "Father, thought you should see this. People are posting about some kind of switch happening with today's wedding." Thomas felt a deepening certainty that he needed to act. In the registry before him, decades of marriages testified to the church's role in witnessing truth and blessing. Authentic love. He would not allow this sacred space to be used for deception, no matter how well-intentioned the deceivers might believe themselves to be. A memory surfaced of Sarah at her confirmation, years after the accident. She'd wheeled herself to the altar with quiet dignity, her head held high despite the whispers. During their preparation sessions, she'd confided her doubts, not about God, but about how some people used faith to justify exclusion. "The church is not meant to be a museum for saints," he'd told her then, quoting one of his favorite expressions. "It's a hospital for sinners, all of us, exactly as we are, coming together to be healed by love." Now, hearing the growing murmur of guests arriving in the sanctuary, Thomas straightened his shoulders. The weight of his collar felt particularly meaningful today, a reminder of his duty not just to perform ceremonies, but to protect the sacred truth they represented. A knock at the door announced James's arrival. The groom looked nervous, but happy, unaware of what might be unfolding. Thomas gestured for him to sit, closed the registry with careful reverence, and prepared himself for a difficult conversation. The ancient bell rope hung in its tower like a sentinel, waiting to announce the ceremony's beginning. Below, in the church's antechamber, James stood with Father Thomas, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as the priest shared his concerns. "Two different programs?" James repeated, studying the evidence before him. "But why would anyone—" His voice trailed off as understanding began to dawn. "Sarah's mother. She's been acting strange lately, making comments about the ceremony. needing to be traditional. He looked up sharply. Where's Sarah now? In the hidden room above, Sarah sat perfectly still in her wheelchair, listening to the muffled sounds of guests being seated. The bell rope passed through a small window near her, its weathered length a reminder of all the weddings it had announced over the years. How many other brides had waited here, she wondered, their hearts full of joy rather than betrayal. Marina stood before the chapel's ornate doors, wearing Sarah's dress, holding Sarah's bouquet. Her hands trembled as she gripped the flowers, their sweet scent now seeming cloying and accusatory. Eleanor fussed with the dress's train, avoiding her niece's eyes. "Auntie," Marina whispered, "this isn't right. We should stop." "It's too late." Eleanor cut her off, though her voice quavered. "Everyone's seated. The gifts are arranged. The photographers are ready. We're doing this for Sarah's own good." In the sanctuary, Tommy fidgeted with his ring-bearer's pillow, looking anxiously toward the doors. "Mum," he whispered to Margaret, "where's Miss Chen? You said she was going to be the bride." Margaret squeezed her son's shoulder, her own unease growing. The whispered conversations she'd overheard, the strange tension in the air, something felt terribly wrong. She caught sight of Father Thomas entering from the side door, James beside him. Her brother's face was tight, with barely controlled emotion. The bell ringer reached for the rope, checking his watch. 3 minutes until the ceremony's scheduled start. The rope swayed slightly in a draft, casting shifting shadows that seemed to mirror the uncertain mood below. James approached his best man, speaking in low, urgent tones. "We need to find Sarah. Now. Check every room, starting with the upper floor." His friend nodded, slipping away as naturally as possible, while James turned to Father Thomas. "What do we do?" The priest's response was interrupted by Eleanor appearing at his elbow. "Father, we're ready to begin. If you could take your place." Her practiced smile faltered as she noticed James's expression. "Mrs. Chen," Father Thomas said quietly, "I think we need to have a conversation about the ceremony arrangements." "Everything is perfectly arranged," Eleanor insisted, her voice rising slightly. "The processional music is about to start. We can't delay." "Mom!" James's sister Margaret approached, Tommy clutching her hand. "What's going on? Where's Sarah?" The bell rope swayed again as the ringer took his position, unaware of the drama unfolding below. In her hidden room, Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door. Her heart jumped. Was someone finally coming to stop this charade? Marina stood trembling behind the chapel doors, the weight of the borrowed dress suddenly suffocating. Through the wood she could hear the mounting confusion, the worried whispers. The bouquet slipped slightly in her sweating hands. Eleanor looked desperately between Father Thomas and James, her carefully constructed plan beginning to unravel. "Please," she whispered, "everyone is watching. We can't cause a scene." "A scene?" James's voice was quiet, but intense. "Like replacing my bride without telling me? Where is she, Eleanor?" The bell rope tensed as the ringer grasped it, ready to announce the hour. But before he could pull, Father Thomas raised his hand in a clear gesture of pause. The sanctuary had grown oddly quiet, the guests sensing that something was amiss. Tommy tugged at James's sleeve. "Uncle James, maybe Miss Chen is in the upstairs. A room. I saw her mum and Marina going up there earlier." James and Father Thomas exchanged glances. The priest nodded, and James turned toward the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Eleanor made a small sound of distress, but didn't move to stop him. The bell rope hung silent, its scheduled announcement suspended in time. Through the small window near Sarah, afternoon light caught its fibers, creating a gentle glow. She touched her grandmother's jade pendant, drawing strength from its smooth surface. A knock at her door made her breath catch. "Sarah?" James's voice, worried but determined. "Are you in there?" Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed finally spilled over. "James!" The door handle rattled, locked from the outside. James's voice turned hard. "Who has the key?" Below, Eleanor's composed facade cracked entirely as all eyes turned to her. With trembling fingers, she withdrew a key from her purse. "Father." Thomas gently but firmly took it from her hand, passing it to Margaret, who rushed it upstairs to her brother. The lock clicked, and James burst in, falling to his knees beside Sarah's wheelchair. "My God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." She pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping his apology. "You weren't meant to know. None of this is your fault." He took her hands in his thumbs brushing away her tears. "This is our wedding day. No one gets to change that. No one gets to hide you away or replace you. You're the only bride I want to marry." The bell rope still hung waiting, its ancient length witnessing this private moment of truth and reconciliation. Below, the guests murmured in confusion, the original wedding programs, revealing the deception as they were compared to the altered versions. Marina had stepped away from the chapel doors, her borrowed finery now feeling like a costume in a tragic play. She watched Eleanor sink into a chair, decades of ingrained prejudices and fears crumbling in the face of exposed truth. Father Thomas stood in the center of it all, his presence a steady reminder of the sacred nature of both love and honesty. The bell rope above seemed to him like a thread connecting all these moments, past traditions meeting present truths, old prejudices confronting new understanding. Father Thomas stood at the altar, his weathered Bible open before him. Its pages bore the marks of decades of use, underlined verses, margin notes, and dog-eared corners that traced his journey as a priest. His fingers rested on a passage he'd marked long ago. "The truth shall set you free." The sanctuary hummed with confused whispers. In the front pew, Eleanor Chen sat rigid, her carefully constructed plan lying in ruins around her. Marina had disappeared into the sacristy, still wearing the borrowed wedding dress that now seemed to burn against her skin. Father Thomas lifted his Bible and stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the church. "My dear friends and family, I must speak to you about truth and love, and how we cannot truly have one without the other." The murmuring quieted as all eyes turned to him. His Bible, worn smooth by countless services, weddings and funerals, felt especially heavy in his hands today. Many of you have known Sarah Chen since she was a child. You watched her grow, celebrated her achievements, prayed for her recovery after her accident. You've seen her rebuild her life with grace and determination, becoming a teacher who touches young lives every day. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the congregation. Today, she was meant to marry James Mitchell, a man who loves her completely and truthfully, exactly as she is. Instead, some among us decided that appearances mattered more than truth, that tradition mattered more than love. Eleanor's shoulders began to shake. In the back of the church, James appeared, pushing Sarah's wheelchair. They paused in the shadows, listening. "This Bible," Father Thomas continued, holding it up, "teaches us that God looks not at outward appearances but at the heart. Yet today, some chose to focus on what others might think, rather than what God knows to be true." He turned to the page where a funeral card marked his place, a memorial for his own sister, who had lived with cerebral palsy. 30 years ago, when I was first ordained, my sister asked me why people stared at her in church. I told her then what I will tell you now. Those who cannot see the divine in all of God's children are blind to the true meaning of faith. Sarah and James began moving slowly down the side aisle, still unnoticed by most of the guests. Father Thomas saw them, but continued speaking, his voice growing stronger. "A wheelchair is not a shame to be hidden. A disability is not a flaw to be disguised. Love, true sacred love, embraces all of who we are. When we try to hide truth for the sake of appearances, we deny not only human dignity, but divine love itself." Eleanor looked up then, seeing her daughter for the first time since the deception had unraveled. Sarah's face was tear-stained, but composed, her hands steady on her wheelchair's rims as she guided herself forward. "Today," Father Thomas declared, "we have a choice. We can continue to perpetuate old prejudices, to hide what makes us uncomfortable, or we can choose truth. We can choose love. We can choose to see each other as God sees us, completely, honestly, and without shame. He closed his Bible and stepped down from the altar, walking to where Sarah and James had stopped halfway up the side aisle. "Sarah Chen," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. "You are the bride. This is your wedding day. Will you take your rightful place at the altar?" The silence that followed seemed to vibrate with possibility. Then, from the front row, Tommy stood up. "Miss Chen," he called out, his voice clear and stutter-free. "You look beautiful." Like a dam breaking, other voices joined in. James's elderly grandmother rose shakily to her feet, applauding. More guests stood, turning to face Sarah with encouraging smiles and nods. Marina emerged from the sacristy, now wearing her original bridesmaid's dress. She walked straight to Sarah, handed her the bridal bouquet, and knelt beside the wheelchair. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This belongs to you." Eleanor remained frozen in her seat, watching as her carefully maintained illusions crumbled. Years of internalized shame and social pressure warred with the undeniable reality before her. Her daughter, radiant in her wedding dress, surrounded by love and acceptance. Father Thomas returned to the altar, opening his Bible once more. The pages fell naturally to a passage he'd marked for this ceremony, chosen weeks ago when Sarah and James had first come to him. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love rejoices with the truth. James took his place beside Sarah's wheelchair at the altar, his face glowing with pride and love. The photographer, who had been briefed on avoiding shots of the wheelchair, instead began capturing moments of genuine joy and dignity. From her seat, Eleanor watched as the ceremony she'd tried to script began to transform into something real and profound. Her gaze fell on Father Thomas's Bible, its well-worn pages testimony to years of teaching that true faith embraced rather than excluded. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows seemed to shine differently now, casting rainbow patterns across Sarah's wheelchair, across the faces of the guests, across the pages of the ancient Bible that had seen countless weddings, but perhaps none quite like this. Father Thomas looked out at the congregation, at the mix of emotions playing across their faces: shame, understanding, acceptance, love. His Bible lay open before him, its truths as relevant now as they had been 2,000 years ago. "Dearly beloved," he began again, his voice strong and clear, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God to witness and bless the marriage of Sarah Chen and James Mitchell. Let us begin again, this time in truth and love." The church microphone carried Father Thomas's voice to every corner of the sanctuary, its clarity making his words impossible to ignore or misinterpret. He stood straight-backed at the altar, his presence commanding attention not through volume, but through moral authority. "Before we proceed with this ceremony," he spoke into the microphone, each word measured and deliberate, "I want to address what has happened here today, not to shame, but to heal, not to divide, but to unite." The microphone picked up the subtle rustle of fabric as guests shifted in their pews, the soft sound of Sarah's wheelchair moving into position beside James at the altar. Eleanor remained in her front row seat, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. "Mrs. Chen," Father Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm through the speakers, "would you join us at the altar, please?" Eleanor looked up, startled. This wasn't accusation in his tone, but invitation. On shaking legs, she stood and walked forward, each step amplified by the microphone in the heavy silence. "For 30 years, Father Thomas continued, I have watched. You raised Sarah with dedication and love. I witnessed your grief after her accident, your fierce determination to help her recover. But somewhere along the way, that love became tangled with fear. Fear of what others might think, fear of how they might judge." The microphone caught Eleanor's sharp intake of breath, the sound of tears in her voice as she whispered, I only wanted to protect her. Mom, Sarah spoke, her voice clear and strong as she took her mother's trembling hand. The microphone carried her words to every listener. You can't protect me by hiding who I am. That's not protection. It's shame. And I won't be ashamed anymore. James stepped closer to Sarah, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder. The microphone picked up his quiet words. I fell in love with Sarah exactly as she is. Her wheelchair isn't something to hide. It's part of her journey, part of her strength. Father Thomas adjusted the microphone, ensuring his next words would reach even those standing in the back. In my years of ministry, I've learned that God's love doesn't discriminate based on how we move, how we speak, how we look, or how we think. When we try to hide differences, we deny the beautiful diversity of God's creation. The sound system captured a small sob from the congregation. Marina, who had taken her place among the bridesmaids, her earlier guilt transformed into fierce pride for her cousin. Sarah, Father Thomas spoke directly to her now, would you share with us why you became a teacher? Sarah's voice, picked up perfectly by the microphone, carried her truth to every ear. After my accident, I learned that strength comes in many forms. I became a teacher because I wanted children to understand that different doesn't mean less. Every day in my classroom, I show them that challenges can become gifts, that obstacles can become opportunities. Tommy's voice piped up from his place near the altar. Miss Chen teaches us that everybody's special in their own way. The microphone caught the ripple of gentle laughter, transforming the atmosphere from tension to tenderness. Father Thomas smiled, then addressed the congregation again. Today's ceremony began with deception, but it will proceed with truth. Mrs. Chen, you sought to protect your daughter from judgment, but look around you now. The microphone amplified the sounds of people shifting in their seats, turning to see the faces of their fellow guests. There was no judgment there now, only understanding, compassion, and dawning awareness of their own prejudices. Eleanor, he continued, using her first name with careful intimacy, your daughter doesn't need protection from who she is. She needs and deserves celebration for who she is. Will you join us in that celebration? The microphone caught Eleanor's shuddering breath, the moment of silence that followed, then her clear response. Yes. Oh, Sarah, yes. I'm so sorry, I've been so wrong. The sound system captured the murmur of approval from the congregation, the soft sounds of tears being wiped away, the rustle of formal clothes as people stood in solidarity. Father Thomas adjusted the microphone one final time. Then let us begin this ceremony again, not with hiding, but with truth. Not with shame, but with pride. Not with fear, but with love. He gestured to the organist, who began playing the wedding march anew. This time, when Sarah wheeled herself into position beside James, her mother stood behind her with hands steady and proud on the wheelchair's handles, ready to give her daughter away properly. The microphone carried the truth of this moment to every heart present, the sound of genuine love triumphing over artificial perfection, of reality proving more beautiful than pretense, of a community learning to see with new eyes. In her hands, Sarah clutched a delicate lace handkerchief, her grandmother's, borrowed as her something old. Its pristine white fabric now bore the marks of her morning's journey, each tear stain telling its own story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph. As she waited for the ceremony to resume properly, Sarah's fingers traced the embroidered edge, remembering other tears this handkerchief had caught. Her grandmother had pressed it into her hands during those first devastating days after the accident, when Sarah had raged against the unfairness of it all. Tears are not weakness, little one, her grandmother had said then, her weathered hands steady and warm. They are the way our heart speaks what our mouth cannot say. Now, 16 years later, these new tears spoke different truths. The first spots on the delicate lace had fallen in that hidden room upstairs, tears of shock and betrayal as she heard her mother's plan unveiled. Those tears had burned with the acid of rejection, each drop a testament to the pain of being deemed not good enough, not perfect enough, not worthy enough to be seen. But then had come other tears, changing the pattern on the handkerchief like a shifting emotional map. Tears of gratitude when James had burst through that locked door, his love and anger burning away any doubt about where he stood. Tears of vindication when Father Thomas's voice had rung out, clear and strong, calling for truth and justice. Sarah looked down at the handkerchief now, seeing how the sunlight through the stained glass windows caught the damp patches, creating tiny prisms. Like her grandmother had said, each tear told its story. Here was the spot where she had first dabbed her eyes after hearing Tommy's clear voice ring out in support. There, the marks from when Marina had knelt beside her wheelchair, returning the bouquet with genuine remorse. And there, the freshest stains from moments ago, when her mother had finally stepped forward, shame replaced by dawning understanding. The handkerchief had been there through it all, collecting not just tears, but memories. Sarah remembered the day she'd first met James, how she'd pulled this same handkerchief from her bag to wipe Tommy's tears after he'd struggled through a particularly difficult reading exercise. James had noticed then how she'd turned the moment into a lesson about perseverance, using the handkerchief's embroidered butterflies to talk about transformation. Sometimes, she'd told Tommy, the hardest moments are just like a butterfly in its cocoon. They seem dark and difficult, but they're actually helping us become stronger. She hadn't known then that James was watching her with growing admiration, seeing not a woman in a wheelchair, but a teacher whose compassion transformed struggles into strength. Now, standing beside her at the altar, he reached over and gently touched the handkerchief in her hands, understanding its significance. The fabric held other memories too, happy tears from the day James proposed, nervous tears during wedding, planning, fierce tears of frustration when her mother's hints about a traditional ceremony had grown more insistent. Each drop had left its mark, creating a tapestry of emotion as intricate as the handkerchief's delicate lace. Sarah glanced at her mother, who stood nearby looking both chastened and awakened. The handkerchief had caught Eleanor's tears too, just moments ago when she'd knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair, asking for forgiveness. Those tears had felt different, healing, transformative, like spring rain washing away winter's frost. Through the years, this small square of lace had absorbed so many stories. The angry tears of learning to navigate a world that wasn't built for wheels, the determined tears of mastering new ways to teach, to move, to live. The joyful tears of finding love that saw past all barriers, and now these complex tears that marked both an ending and a beginning. Sarah smoothed the handkerchief in her lap, feeling its dampness beneath her fingers. Each tear stain was a testament to her journey, not just today's trials, but every step that had led her here. The marks would dry, but they would leave their trace, subtle shadows in the fabric that spoke of challenges faced and overcome. Her grandmother had told her once that real love, like real life, leaves its marks. Perfect isn't beautiful, she'd said, running her fingers over the handkerchief's time-worn edge. Beautiful is real. Looking up at James, at Father Thomas, ready to begin again, at her mother standing tall and finally seeing clearly, Sarah understood. These tears, all of them, had helped write her story. Not a story of shame and hiding, but one of strength and truth. Not a tale of conforming to others' expectations, but of standing firm in her own worth. She folded the handkerchief carefully, tucking it into her bouquet. There might be more tears before the day was done. Tears of joy, tears of healing, tears of celebration. But now they would fall freely, without shame or shadow, each one adding its voice to the chorus of her heart's truth. The handkerchief had served its purpose, collecting the hidden tears of transformation. Now it was time for transparency, for joy unshielded, for love unveiled in all its authentic beauty. The old oak pews of St. Michael's Church had witnessed countless ceremonies over the decades, their polished surfaces holding the whispered prayers and silent judgments of generations. Today they held a congregation in transformation, each wooden row becoming a front-row seat to profound change. In the third pew on the left, Mrs. Zhang, who had known Eleanor Chen since college, felt the smooth wood beneath her fingers as revelation. Dawned. How many times had she herself turned away from difference, choosing comfort over courage? She thought of her own grandson, born with Down syndrome, and how she'd initially hesitated to bring him to family gatherings. "We do it out of love," she whispered to her husband, "but sometimes our love becomes a cage." Across the aisle, in a pew worn smooth by years of faithful attendance, sat Mr. Peterson, the retired high school principal. He remembered Sarah as a student after her accident, how some teachers had questioned whether she could manage regular classes. The same pew that now supported him had once held his own prejudices, his surprised relief when Sarah had graduated as valedictorian. Front pews, reserved for family, creaked with the weight of shifting perspectives. Eleanor's sister dabbed at her eyes, remembering how she'd supported the plan to hide Sarah away, thinking she was protecting her niece. Now the old wood beneath her felt like a witness stand, forcing her to confront her own complicity. Near the back, where the afternoon sun warmed the ancient oak, sat some of Sarah's students' parents. They watched their children's beloved teacher at the altar, seeing for the first time how their own discomfort with her disability had influenced their initial reactions to her role in their children's lives. "Mom," whispered 8-year-old Lucy. To her mother in the 7th row, "Miss Chen's wheelchair matches her dress now." "It's pretty." The simple observation rippled through nearby pews, highlighting how adults often complicated what children saw with natural clarity. The pews had always served as more than mere seating. They were silent participants in every ceremony, their sturdy presence providing structure to moments of spiritual significance. Today, they became something more, a foundation for transformation, each row a step in the community's journey toward understanding. In the family pews, Marina's parents shifted uncomfortably, the familiar wood offering no comfort as they recalled their own role in the deception. Their daughter's courage in choosing truth over appearance had shamed them into recognition of their own prejudices. The well-worn pew where James's family sat told its own story of acceptance. His grandmother reached out to pat Sarah's wheelchair. As she passed, her arthritis-gnarled hands understanding something about adaptive strength, the old wood creaked in harmony with her whispered, "Welcome to the family, dear." Even the empty pews spoke volumes, particularly the spaces now left clear for Sarah's wheelchair, gaps in the traditional seating arrangement that somehow made the church feel more complete, not less. These spaces challenged decades of assumed tradition, asking why inclusion had ever been seen as disruption. As Father Thomas continued the ceremony, the afternoon sun shifted, casting shadows through the stained glass that danced across the pews like a living reminder of change. The old wood absorbed these patterns as it had absorbed countless prayers, tears, and revelations before, adding today's transformation to its lasting memory. In these pews, the congregation found themselves sitting with their own prejudices, assumptions, and fears. The smooth wood beneath them offered no judgment, only support as they wrestled with necessary truths. Each creak and settle of the ancient oak seemed to whisper wisdom about tradition, about change, about the difference between preserving what is precious and clinging to what must evolve. As the ceremony drew toward its conclusion, the pews held a changed congregation, one awakening to a broader understanding of love, dignity, and acceptance. These ancient seats, which had supported generations of worshippers, now cradled a community being born anew, their solid presence a reminder that the strongest foundations can support the most profound changes. The wheelchair ramp at St. Michael's Church hadn't always been there. Sarah remembered the day it was installed 3 years ago, after months of her gentle advocacy. It wasn't just a concrete pathway. It was a statement about who belonged in the house of God. Now, as she prepared to roll down it as a bride, its gentle slope carried even deeper meaning. James stood at her side as they positioned themselves at the top of the ramp. The late afternoon sun caught the metallic sheen of the handrails, transforming them into ribbons of gold. These were the same rails Sarah's students had decorated with flowers and ribbons yesterday during the wedding preparation, turning a utilitarian structure into something beautiful. "Ready?" James asked softly, his hand resting lightly on the back of her wheelchair. Sarah nodded, her voice steady. "I'll guide myself down, but stay close. Always," he promised, understanding that this moment was about more than just returning to the ceremony. It was about claiming her place, on her own terms. The ramp had been built at precisely the right gradient, a careful calculation of rise over run, engineered for independence. Sarah's hands found their familiar position on her wheels as she began her descent. Each inch down the ramp felt like a victory, every turn of the wheels a declaration of dignity. She remembered the discussions when the ramp was first proposed. Some had worried it would destroy the church's historic facade. Others had questioned the expense, but Father Thomas had stood firm. A church without access for all is a church that has forgotten its purpose. Now that same ramp carried her toward her destiny, not as a compromised addition to the church's architecture, but as an integral part of its welcome. Her wheels moved smoothly over the carefully textured surface, designed to provide grip without resistance. From inside, the music swelled, not the traditional wedding march, but the hymn Amazing Grace, its notes spilling out through the open doors. The choice felt perfect. This was indeed about grace in all its forms. At the bottom of the ramp, Eleanor waited. Sarah's mother had walked out of the church specifically to meet her daughter here, a symbolic gesture of starting again. Her eyes were clear now, free from the shame that had driven her earlier actions. "Sarah," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion, "walk me down the aisle." The intentional choice of words, walk rather than roll, struck Sarah deeply. Her mother wasn't trying to hide or change her daughter's reality anymore. She was embracing a broader definition of movement, of progress, of grace. The ramp merged seamlessly with the church entrance, no threshold to bump over, no awkward transition to navigate. Sarah paused there, at the point where slope met level ground, where exclusion transformed into embrace. Inside, the congregation waited in supportive silence. Through the doors, Sarah could see Tommy bouncing excitedly in his place by the altar, could see Marina standing tall and proud among the bridesmaids, could see Father Thomas with his worn Bible open before him. This was the same ramp she used. Every Sunday, the same path she took to her classroom on the ground floor where she taught her students. But today, it felt like more than just a path. It felt like a bridge between what was and what could be, between hiding and celebrating, between shame and pride. James walked beside her as she rolled forward, matching his pace to hers, just as he had from the day they met. The ramp had taught him something too, about how love adapts, how support doesn't mean taking over, how the best partnerships find their own unique rhythm. As they crossed the threshold together, Sarah thought about all the others who would use this ramp after her. Future brides, perhaps, or elderly parishioners, or parents with strollers. Each smooth roll up or down its surface would be another affirmation that everyone deserved a way in, that all paths to love and faith were valid. The ramp had changed more than just the church's architecture. It had changed minds, opened hearts, transformed understanding. Now it was changing history, carrying the first bride in a wheelchair proudly into St. Michael's Church, not through a side entrance, not hidden from view, but right down the center aisle where she belonged. The silver chalice on the altar caught the light from the stained glass windows, its century-old surface reflecting fragments of color across the sanctuary. Father Thomas lifted it now, its familiar weight in his hands lending gravity to his words. "This chalice," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "has served this community for over 100 years. If you look closely, you'll see it's not perfect. There are dents from years of use, tarnished spots that won't polish away, marks that tell the story of its journey." He turned the chalice slowly, letting everyone see its imperfections. Yet these marks don't diminish its sacred purpose. In fact, they enhance it. They remind us that true beauty isn't found in perfection, but in authenticity. Sarah and James sat before him, her wheelchair positioned naturally at the altar, his hand resting easily on its arm. Father Thomas saw in their faces the same truth. The chalice represented that love, like faith, grew stronger through challenges, not in spite of them. "When this chalice was first crafted," he continued, "it was bright and flawless, but it became holy, not through its perfection, but through its service, through being used, being needed, being part of countless moments of grace." He set the chalice down beside his Bible, the old silver nestling against the worn leather. Sarah and James understand this truth. Their love isn't built on illusions of perfection. It's built on something far stronger: acceptance, understanding, and the courage to be authentic. Eleanor, seated in the front pew, drew a shaky breath. Father Thomas met her eyes with compassion. "We all learn this lesson eventually, that what we sometimes see as flaws are actually channels for grace, that our attempts to hide difference often hide blessings as well." The chalice caught another ray of light, sending ribbons of color across Sarah's white dress and across the polished metal of her wheelchair. "Look at how the light plays across this chalice," Father Thomas said. "See how its very imperfections create beauty, how its marks and dents catch the light in unique ways." He paused, letting the visual sink in. "That's what love does. Real. Love doesn't try to smooth away all the marks and dents. It doesn't hide what makes us unique. Instead, it illuminates our authentic selves, helping us shine in our own way." Tommy, who had been fidgeting with his ring pillow, suddenly spoke up. "Like how Miss Chen teaches us all different ways to do things." The spontaneous observation drew warm chuckles from the congregation, but Father Thomas nodded seriously. "Exactly like that," he agreed. "Sarah has shown her students, and now all of us, that there isn't just one right way to move through the world. There isn't just one kind of grace, one kind of dignity, one kind of love." He lifted the chalice again, this time filling it with wine for the ceremony. "This vessel has never rejected anyone based on their differences. It has served kings and paupers, saints and sinners, the steady-handed and the trembling. It reminds us that we are all worthy, all welcome, all beloved." The afternoon sun shifted, sending new patterns of light dancing across the chalice's surface. Today, we celebrate not just the union of two people, but the truth they represent. That love, like this chalice, becomes more beautiful through use, through service, through embracing rather than hiding its unique character. Sarah's eyes glistened with tears as she looked up at James. Father Thomas saw in their shared glance the very essence of what he was trying to convey: love that transformed perceived limitations into strengths, that found beauty in truth rather than pretense. "Let this chalice," he concluded, "be our teacher today. Let its ancient wisdom remind us that worth isn't found in perfection, but in purpose. That beauty isn't about hiding our differences, but celebrating them. And that love, real love, sees clearly, accepts completely, and celebrates joyfully." During a quiet moment in the ceremony, Eleanor slipped her hand into her purse and withdrew a small velvet box that had traveled through 3 generations of Chen women. Inside nestled her mother's wedding ring, a delicate gold band adorned with a pattern of intertwined roses. She had planned to present it differently today, to Marina, maintaining the illusion of the perfect bride. Now, its significance had transformed entirely. Standing shakily, Eleanor moved to the altar where Sarah sat in her wheelchair. Father Thomas paused in his ceremony, understanding the importance of this unscripted moment. The ring caught the light, its worn surface telling stories of marriages that had weathered storms and emerged stronger. "Sarah," Eleanor's voice quavered, "my mother gave me this ring on my wedding day. Her mother gave it to her. I almost betrayed its meaning today, trying to preserve an image instead of honoring love." She knelt beside her daughter's wheelchair, holding out the open box. "Can you forgive me?" Sarah looked at the ring, remembering how her grandmother had often told her, "True love, like this gold, doesn't tarnish. It only grows richer with time." She took her mother's trembling hands in hers. "Mom," she said softly, "when grandmother gave you this ring, what did she say it represented?" Eleanor's tears fell freely now. "She said it represented our family's strength, our ability to bend without breaking, to grow through hardship, to—" She stopped, realization dawning, to find beauty in life's unexpected turns. Marina stepped forward from her place among the bridesmaids, removing the borrowed jewelry she'd been given for the planned deception. "Auntie," she said, "I think grandmother would be proud to see the ring find its true home today." The old ring seemed to glow with new purpose as Eleanor slipped it onto Sarah's right hand, not replacing her engagement ring, but complementing it. Like her grandmother's jade pendant, it became another link in a chain of family truth. Finally, unobscured by pretense. "My daughter," Eleanor said clearly, standing tall now, "my beautiful, strong, perfect daughter." Each word felt like healing, like bridges being rebuilt between mother and child, between past and present, between fear and acceptance. James watched this transformation with gentle understanding, seeing the family ring take on new meaning, not just as a symbol of tradition, but as a token of reconciliation, of wisdom hard-won, and truth finally embraced. The wedding veil floated gracefully around Sarah's shoulders, carefully designed to complement rather than compete with her wheelchair. Its shortened length and thoughtful arrangement were a testament to creativity rather than compromise. Pearl-studded clips held it elegantly in place, allowing freedom of movement while maintaining its traditional beauty. Marina, now embracing her proper role as maid of honor, stepped forward to adjust the veil with practiced hands. "Remember when we spent 3 weekends redesigning this?" she asked softly. "You taught me then that different doesn't mean less beautiful. I'm sorry I forgot that lesson, even briefly." The veil caught the light as Sarah moved into position for the exchange of vows, its shimmer reflecting in James's eyes as he gazed at his bride. This was no hurried, hidden ceremony now. It was a true celebration, with every detail honoring who they really were. Father Thomas smiled as he proceeded with the ceremony, watching how the veil's movement harmonized with the wheelchairs, subtle shifts creating a dance of its own kind. The congregation sat in appreciation of this unexpected grace, seeing beauty in its unique design rather than focusing on what had been changed. When James lifted the veil to kiss his bride, it floated up like a cloud of acceptance, transforming what might have once been seen as accommodation into an artwork of love's adaptability. Their kiss was met with genuine applause, celebrating not just their union, but the triumph of authentic love over artificial perfection. Eleanor, watching from the front pew, finally understood that true beauty wasn't about hiding difference. It was about celebrating it. The modified veil, like her daughter's spirit, hadn't been diminished by adaptation. It had been enhanced by it. As the newlyweds turned to face their guests, the veil settled into its carefully planned arrangement, as natural and right as the love that had brought them to this moment. In its flowing lines and thoughtful design, it represented everything this wedding had become, a testament to the beauty of being exactly who you are. During the reception, Father Thomas unrolled the architectural plans on a display table near the church entrance. The blue and white drawings showed more than just building modifications. They represented a community's evolution. The existing wheelchair ramp was highlighted in bold lines, but now new additions spread across the paper like possibilities. Wider doorways, adapted bathroom facilities, a lift to the choir loft. Mrs. Zhang studied the plans intently, her finger tracing the proposed changes. "We should have done this years ago," she said, thinking of her grandson. "Sometimes it takes a moment like today to open our eyes." She reached for her checkbook, making the first donation toward what would become known as the Accessibility Fund. The blueprints attracted a steady stream of visitors throughout the evening. Parents of Sarah's students clustered around, seeing their children's beloved teacher's influence extending beyond the classroom. The plans became a conversation piece, sparking discussions about other needed changes in the community. Not just physical adaptations, but adjustments in attitudes and expectations. Eleanor stood before the drawings later, her hand resting on the paper. The church that had almost witnessed her greatest mistake would now become a testament to growth and inclusion. Like the architectural plans, her own perspective had been fundamentally redesigned, transformed by love and understanding. The anniversary photo stood on Father Thomas's desk, taken exactly 1 year after the wedding that had changed everything. In it, Sarah and James posed on the church's new universal access platform, surrounded by their extended family. But it wasn't just the physical changes to the church that caught the eye. It was the natural, unposed joy in everyone's faces. The way Eleanor stood proudly beside her daughter's wheelchair, the genuine smiles that spoke of lessons learned and hearts transformed. The photograph captured more than just a moment. It documented a year of growth. In the background, you could see the new ramp system that had replaced the old single slope, designed with input from Sarah and other community members with mobility needs. Tommy, now a year older, stood tall beside his uncle, wearing a t-shirt. From the Inclusion Awareness program that Sarah had helped launch at St. Mary's Elementary, Marina, who had transformed her fashion design business to include adaptive clothing, stood wearing one of her new creations. The photo showed her hand resting naturally on Sarah's shoulder. No trace remained of the guilt and shame from a year ago, replaced by the comfortable closeness of family who had learned to embrace truth over appearances. Eleanor's change was perhaps the most striking. The anxiety and rigid perfectionism that had driven her to such desperate measures had mellowed into peaceful acceptance. The camera caught her mid-laugh, one hand on Sarah's wheelchair, the other holding her grandson, James and Sarah's adopted son, who had joined their family 3 months earlier. The thank you card arrived on Father Thomas's desk exactly 1 year and 1 day after the wedding. It was handmade, featuring a watercolor painting of St. Michael's Church with its new accessibility features rendered in gentle strokes. Inside, Sarah's neat handwriting filled the page with words that brought tears to the elderly priest's eyes. "Dear Father Thomas," it read, "sometimes the greatest acts of love aren't the dramatic ones, but the quiet moments when someone stands firmly for truth. A year ago, you didn't just save a wedding, you helped transform a community. Your courage gave others permission to change, to grow, to see differently. Yesterday, at our anniversary celebration, I watched my mother help another family struggling with their daughter's disability. Different isn't less," she told them, words I never thought I'd hear her say. Marina's adaptive fashion line is helping people feel beautiful as they are. Even Tommy has started a school club promoting inclusion. But most importantly, you showed us all that love. Real love doesn't hide or disguise. It illuminates and celebrates. Thank you for helping us find our way to that truth. With eternal gratitude, Sarah and James, Father Thomas, placed the card beside his worn Bible, a reminder that sometimes the greatest sermons are the ones we live rather than speak.